What's up, Lance? How are you doing?
Hey, doing good. How are you doing?
Good. If you're joining us online, we're talking to you live. If you're here at 4 o'clock, we're talking to you live. Called Lean In with Justin. So basically, it's basically we dissect a couple of scriptures and we're walking through Third John, and John couldn't make it, so Lance kind of was pinch hitting for us, and so appreciate that. Jumping in on this, Lance. And I got to say, for our first opener, I got to ask you a question. And the question is, while I give some snowfall for us right now, uh, what do you prefer, a toboggan? And I'm not exactly sure I know what a toboggan is. Uh, if you see a snowy hill, are you going down with a sled or an inner tube? Sled
Oh,
or an inner tube? What's your preferred, fun, delectable way that you're going to go down that hill?
I think I'm gonna go with the tube, because I feel like I can get a little more speed on it, and it also
More
has the
dangerous?
cushion when you fall.
Oh, okay. The more speed's more dangerous. I mean, because there's no control in it, right?
No, there's not. No,
There's
absolutely
sometimes
not.
like a toboggan. In fact, I don't know. Like those sleds, I'm thinking that some sleds have brakes, so who knows?
That's
And
true.
so we'll put that snow away. And so good stuff, man. So Lance, what we're doing here is we are in Third John, and just to let everyone know that watches this, next Wednesday will be the last lean in of the year, and we'll start lean in back up in January. So keep an eye open for that. And we're kind of looking at some books of the Bible that we want to kind of tackle. I've got an idea, but I want to run it by John first because I'm kind of roping him on this. Um, so, Lance, I'm going to have you start us off by reading 1 through 4, and then I'll comment, and then I'll switch, and then I'll read 5 through 8, and then you'll comment, and then we'll kind of talk about these scriptures. Again, Third John, and Lance, take it away.
All right, so we got Third John, super long book in the Bible. One verse longer than last week's book. Says this, starting off in verse 1: To the elder, to my dear friend Gaius. Is that how you would say it, Justin? Is Gaius?
Yeah, yeah. Very
Cool.
Romanesque.
Yes, Gaius, whom I love in the truth, dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth.
All right, Lance. What's I love about the scripture is I always like going to the historical context of the scripture. What's fascinating about Third John that doesn't necessarily ring through with First and Second John is this is what's called a letter of recommendation. So, Lance, as you know, in the ancient world, you'd have philosophers and you'd have teachers that would travel. And where would they stay? They, some would say, well, you would stay at an inn, right? Well, you got to be careful because it's isn't it interesting? Everybody's like, oh, you got to stay at a motel and all that. Well, in the ancient world, an inn would oftentimes be linked to a brothel. So, could you imagine a teacher that's a pastor or a missionary coming through? You wouldn't want to stay at someone's house because you don't necessarily want to stay at the inn. So it it's an interesting thing when we start talking about Luke chapter 2 that there was no room in the inn for Joseph and Mary, and I imagine that they really wouldn't want to stay at an inn anyway. The choice. So that's kind of what it was in the ancient world. Not all the time, but a lot of it. So you would have people staying with people, but and so you would a lot of the and again, this is a Middle Eastern culture that's very hospitable. I mean, they're opening their homes much more than I would say even in the West. mean, there's just part of this. If you're traveling, we're opening our home to you. So a lot of times, these teachers, or if they're wanting to get some place to stay, they would have a letter of recommendation by someone of authority. So in this case, and this is a practice that the early church did, Paul would give a letter to, and again, we'll see who this is. It's Demetrius. Would give a letter to Demetrius with his hand, or not, it wouldn't be Paul, I'm sorry, John would give a letter to Demetrius and kind of give his letter of recommendation so he can show, hey, John vouches for me, an apostle of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. Let me stay at your house, at this house church or whatnot. And so that's kind of what this letter is. But isn't it fascinating that this letter survives? That it was in there. I mean, I'm not even sure if John would have fully understood that his letter would survive 2,000 years later. Whereas when you read Philippians, you're like, yeah, this thing needs to survive. But this is really, in a sense, an insight into the workings of the early church. And so he's taken this letter, a letter of recommendation to a church leader named Gaius, and he's given him warm greetings and says, hey, I love seeing your faithfulness to the truth, gives him props for that. And then on the last verse, I find no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. And again, this terminology of, my children walking in the truth, this is kind of like a spiritual father. John was like the spiritual father to this church that's this house church that's growing. And so that's kind of what I got from it. Do you have any insights?
No, I love that. I didn't know that about it being a letter of recommendation. Um, I think that's so cool. And like you talked about this being preserved thousands of years and getting to see the inner workings of the church. Do we know anything about Gaius? Like I don't know. Was I've heard he might have been like possibly this is a Greek spelling of a Roman name, Caius. And so was he possibly like a Roman, or do we really know anything else?
Yeah. I didn't do too much of a deep dive into who Gaius is. And you're right. It may be more Gentile and Greek than Latin, because Gaius is definitely a Latin name. I mean,
Hmm.
that's that is Gaius Julius Caesar. You don't get much more Roman than Gaius. I mean, that is just so Roman. So I don't know how much Latin he is versus Greek. Um, just fascinating that John is connecting with him, and it would have been interesting to know his story. I don't
Hmm.
know his story. Maybe there's um, extra biblical sources that we could cite. I don't really know, but maybe. But I always kind of looked at that and thought, well, this guy is definitely Roman. This is no, and maybe influenced, but it sounds so stinking Roman to me. So, but that's an interesting thought. So, if you're ready, let's go on to 5 through 8.
Let's do this.
All right, dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name. So I'm just going to highlight that because that is fascinating. That they went out receiving no help from the pagans. We ought to therefore to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth.
Hmm.
So, what did you get off of that there, my friend?
I love him starting off in verse 5. He keeps referring to Gaius as his dear friend, and I just think that's kind of cool. You talked about this being a letter of recommendation, like he's reinforcing the camaraderie, the friendship that they have, just how deep this relationship has. It's not just a friend, but every time he's saying, "This is my dear friend," like this is somebody who I know, this is somebody who I care about. And then he tells him that you're faithful for what you're doing for people, even though they're strangers to you. And I think he's bringing out this really cool idea that As the church, the there's always going to be strangers that come into our lives, but are we faithful to them the way that God has called us to? And he's like, look at, obviously these people haven't done anything for you to be nice to them, to be kind to them, to love them, but you're choosing to do it to strangers. And he's commending him for that. And I see that in so many of our people that come to the worship center, the way they treat others, the way they treat people for the first time coming to the church. And I think we can say the same thing about a lot of the people we know. Man, they're they're faithful in what they're doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they might not, know them or have like a relationship with them. And
Right.
I think that's cool the way he brings that out.
Right. And I mean, hospitality was big. And so basically, John is reinforcing this value that the early church had. They were known for their hospitality. And that he's basically reinforcing that, like, Gaius, thank you. You're welcoming people. And it's going to be fascinating. I mean, I don't want to, give too much, because next week we find out why he's championing hospitality, because there's another house church down the street that's not. And so it's fascinating. You don't want to miss it. It'll be the Christmas Eve of Eve.
Ooh.
So yeah, Wednesday before the Christmas Eve on Thursday. So make sure you want to tune in. But Lance, what I loved is he says in verse 7, it was for the sake of the name. This is kind of an interesting thing, because this is a slant, a Jewish slant on kind of God, kind of that they oftentimes, like you would know, they would never say the name of God. It was too holy. And so oftentimes they would say Yahovah, uh, Jehovah. And so, but they would do it almost as a breath, because it was just so holy. And so they would never like say the name. So there was this tradition that instead of saying the name of God, because they felt like they weren't holy enough to say the name, they would say the name. And so John is equating Jehovah, a Jewish slant, saying, y'all even say the name. This is Jesus. So he's using that as in Jesus, giving it the same kind of Jewish connection there. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on that.
Yeah, that's cool. I never knew that.
Yeah. See, you learn something new every time you come up, lean in, right?
That's right. I like that.
Yeah. So, all right. So, Lance, next week, we're going to be finishing Third John, and that'll be 9 through 15. And we're going to talk about that guy right there. But don't want to, yeah. You'll have to wait till next week. And of course, here on Lean In, I do want to correct myself. So, thank you, Kathleen. A toboggan has no brakes. And so this goes to show you how much I really know about sliding down a hill. I just know that there's some slides that some have brakes, but again, toboggan outside my understanding knowledge. So thank you, Kathleen. Did not fully understand what a toboggan is, and that's always good. So I think for that, we got to lead out with some snow as we
Yeah.
say, can't wait to see you
I'm gonna catch one on
next
my tongue.
week at 4 o'clock on Wednesday as we finish up Third John. Love to see you then. See you guys.